Today, we're going to talk about state of the market, but even more than that, how can we as real estate investors who are all over the US and maybe even in other countries that are listening to this, how can we take some principles and a framework and apply that to where we're at so that we can look at our own market and understand where is it at, where is it headed, and what might we do differently to make sure our investing strategy meets what's currently going on.
I'm excited about this episode. I'm kind of a data nerd, and I might be in the worst market in the United States.
I don't know because I'm not in your market, so I guess we'll have to compare and see who's worse. Is that like the kind of award that you want? I'm in the worst market. I'm not sure that I'm excited about the state of Florida being a complete dumpster fire for real estate right now, but I'm excited to talk about the advantages I'm gaining because of it. Sure. And little known fact that you probably didn't know is we had for about 2 years an Airbnb in right outside of Clearwater Bay or Clearwater area in Florida. So I was in the Florida market for about 1.5 years, 2 years, and then we exited. So exited because we had some pain attached to that, but which probably was related to some of the pain that you're still experiencing.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about Florida, so if you just kind of zoom out, the last time we had a quote unquote normal real estate market, I think in the country was like 2019. And then we had this black swan event called the pandemic. And then that made Florida go insane. So like in Florida, I think it was said that there were 1,000 people a day moving to Florida once after people were kind of like released from the pandemic. And if I think back to that time, there was all this like left versus right infighting, and like some states, like if you were in New York, they were super locked down. And then Florida, the governor here was like, yeah, we don't believe in the pandemic. It's not real, even though it's kind of real. And I don't know, it was like this dichotomy. So people saw Florida as this like haven of freedom, and they just started coming down here in droves. And then when you look at I like to look at migration patterns at the highest level for me. Where are people moving to? Because it's still supply and demand business. If there are more people moving somewhere where there are not enough houses, then demand will be really high. In Florida, that was the case, what the effect of that since 2020 was literally the values of properties were doubling. I mean, we could buy a house, Sheri, like a complete dump, do nothing to it, list it, and make tens of thousands of dollars I didn't even turn the electricity on.
That's amazing.
I mean, some real dumps I'm talking about here. And home prices were doubling, like literally doubling, and in some cases tripling. The rate was just insane. And now we're seeing a bit of a slowdown, a pullback in migration to Florida. People, it's a funny thing because in North Carolina and South Carolina, they call their transplants halfbacks. So people move from the Northeast down to Florida and go, oh my gosh, it's so hot here. And then they move halfway back up.
That's hilarious. I've never heard that.
So we get all these like Northeast transplants. They come down to Florida and then they move out. That's a pretty normal migration pattern. I think we saw an increased level coming out of COVID, which made it increased level of people moving out of here. Still good migration. But every year U-Haul puts out basically like a one-way ticket migration pattern study report to see where people are moving to. Because if you just look at normal sources of economic data for migration, it lags like 24 months.
Sure.
So it's not very immediate. The best immediate source I found has been the U-Haul data. So all that said, in the state of Florida, prices are astronomically high compared to 2019, and there are less people are moving out of the state, less people moving into the state. Therefore, we have saw some of the biggest pullbacks in pricing in our state compared to other states.
And so
Adam, how do you use that migration pattern data to inform your flipping and other types of investing?
Yeah, I think, I kind of look at it broadly for us is like, if demand is high, then no big deal. That's great. We can sell houses and make a lot of money. But if supply is higher than demand, then it's going to be harder to sell houses. So that just affects our business on the front end. We'll make sure we're buying in better areas. We'll make sure we're buying at better prices, and we're being very conservative on what we're projecting to be our sale prices in our properties.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's super, super valuable. One of the metrics that I look at is months of inventory, which the migration pattern, as you're talking about, it fits into that because it is a supply and demand metric. The more supply we have and less demand, the more months of inventory that we're going to have. And it's interesting. So I think we'll be getting into this in a little bit about like how that maybe is playing out in our actual locations that we're investing at, and then where we're at. But these are metrics that you can ask a real estate agent. So I am a licensed agent, which means I have access to the MLSs where I'm licensed at, and I can go into the MLS and pull reports that the MLS has created that give me all of this information. So if you're not sure, if you're thinking about investing somewhere or investing in your local area and you're not sure what the metrics are, what the data points are that Adam gets so excited about, if you're not sure what they are, you can totally ask an agent. And if they say, I have no idea, I don't know where to find them, maybe move along to another agent that's a little bit more seasoned that actually knows this information, because it's super helpful. So the more months of inventory that there are, that means that there is a bigger supply and less demand. And typically, one of the general rules of thumb is if there is more than 3 months worth of inventory, then that's more of a buyer's market, where if it's less than 3 months of inventory, it's more of a seller's market. So as an investor, as a flipper, I would prefer to be in seller markets because then, the things aren't sitting as long. We have a little bit more leverage to be able to negotiate better and, save our bottom line and our pocketbook. But that's a metric that I think is super valuable and important as well.
What's really interesting is you say that. I'm looking at the state of Florida writ large, and obviously we know it can be down to the county, down to the city, down to the neighborhood. But the state of Florida right now has 7 months supply in inventory. So we're up exponentially. And the result of that is our median days on market is 72 days.
Oh my goodness.
Which is, that's creeping towards 3 months. So if you put a house for sale, like you're talking 3 months more of holding time for a flipper, 3 months more interest cost. What's really cool too, Sheri, and I think this is helpful for a lot of people, is like as an agent, we can pull stats for our county at price point.
Yes.
So I look in our counties that we do business in, and I say, at what price point are houses selling for the highest percentage of asking price? Like if they're asking 100,000, are they selling for 98? Are they selling for 100? Or are they going over? And in what price point are they selling the fastest? And I think, standard wisdom for house flippers is like, stay right in that first time home buyer market. It's super safe. But that's actually not what the data says in my market. The middle America has gotten squeezed on affordability. The middle America income, combined household income, is like $83,000, and our median price of a house is $433,000. That's a pretty expensive payment for those people. So where we see the highest percentage of sales price and the fastest in terms of days on market being the lowest is in two spots. The below medium price point and the more expensive stuff, like $1 million plus, actually sells at or above the asking, and it goes the fastest. And I have my analysis of that is in Florida specifically, we have a lot of snowbirds. People want to come here for parts of the year. So they're okay buying a cheaper property. And we actually see the mobile homes on land in Central Florida go really fast. And, a lot of them are selling for cash and they're selling at or above the sales price. And because it's very affordable as compared to that like $400,000 to $500,000 house. And then when I look at the luxury market, that $1 million+ market, that's a different class of buyer. Those people are smart with their money. They have the capital, and many of them are coming from New York. And what'll happen is they'll sell a $3 million house in New York and be able to come down here and buy something for $1 million cash. That's actually bigger and nicer.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's super good reminder about, what are the price points, how that might differ, the kinds of migration that's happening. So can I just compare just real quick? So I live in the capital city of Wyoming, Cheyenne, Wyoming. We are a small market by most people's standards. Our county, which is how our real estate is assessed or is sold, is really within the county. Our county has about 75 to 80,000 people, period.
Wow.
And the town itself is in the 60s. And so there's pros and cons to that. I know a lot of people invest in big cities and a lot of people invest in small. So I think it's great that we kind of have the variation here. And so I just want to share with you a couple of the numbers, how they differ, which is super interesting. When you said 7 months of inventory, I was like, oh my gosh. So when I was running numbers locally here in Cheyenne, we have, it's broken down by in the city and rural, because we have a lot of rural, which rural here simply means you're not in the same city limits and most likely means you're getting acreage. And so it could be three acres. It's usually within about 45 minutes from here. It's usually sold in 7 to 20 acre plots. And then you also got the larger ranches and that sort of thing. And so those are two kind of separate markets. But in our city, our supply is 1.33 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And rural is 3.99, so about 4 months. And so I have done both flips in the city. Most of what we do is in the city, but we've also done some in the county. And that's just a really good piece of information to know, that based on supply and the amount of time something sits, my rural property is gonna sit longer.
Yeah, and it's the conversation I often have with like people in our community, the house flippers. Like, I put my house on the market and I'm freaking out. Do I need to do a price drop? Like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting any showings. And I'll just go to the data, and I'll say, well, like, for that specific zip code or that neighborhood, what are the average days on market? And they'll be like, 60. And I'm like, you're 3 days on market. Why are we freaking out? Like, call me back after we're 60 days on market. Then we can talk about strategies, pricing strategies, staging strategies, all the strategies we would use to get more attention on a listing. But yeah, I see that all the time where people are like, I put it on the market and it didn't sell. And I'm like, how long you been on the market? Like, a week. I'm like, what are you talking about?
It's because we're having PTSD from COVID, when everything did get multiple offers within a week. And so I think as investors, we really have to remind ourselves of the current reality. And honestly, I think it's the same challenge that the buyers are having, is that they're still having, they still have a perspective that is influenced by COVID. And that's not the way it is anymore. We don't have those interest rates anymore from the buyer perspective. And from the seller perspective, you're probably not going to get, or you can't expect multiple offers. You can't expect to have your house under contract the first weekend after one open house. It really is a new reality, and embracing it and learning how to live and work and invest in the new reality, I think is to our best interest.
There's some other really interesting. I love economics. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a nerd, but real estate is a people business. It's not really a house business. House is the widget,
everybody has to have a place to live, whether it's an apartment, a house, or whatever. So I like that the University of Michigan puts out the Consumer Sentiment Index. And this index is also a really great indicator of the economy and how people feel, because how people feel is going to drive how they make decisions, right? We make emotional decisions and justify them with logic, as you well know with your background. So I like to even come out of the supply and demand data and look at the Michigan Consumer Index, which is basically just a gauge of how consumers feel about the current economy and the future financial outlook. So if they believe that the economy is bad and not going to get better because of tariffs or whatever's in the news today, their likelihood to pull the trigger on a big purchase, the biggest purchase they make in their life, by the way, which is a house, is going to go down. Like they're going to be, even if they can afford it, they're less apt to maybe make that decision because emotionally they're going, well, the economy's bad. It's not the right time to buy. We're going to wait for the rates to come down. Like all this stuff we hear. And then when we look at this Consumer Sentiment Index, it's down 32% year over year.
Interesting. So as you were talking, and I'm going to totally, I don't have anything other than my individual perspective of some of the people that I've seen move here. So I'm gonna maybe frame why we only have 1.5, not even 1.5 months of supply, at least in the state. In a economy freak out, what we've noticed, so my husband and I are both agents, and so we get to have lots of these conversations about why people are moving here. We get a lot of people moving from the West Coast, and the worst economic sentiment, not sediment, because this isn't
sentiment.
This isn't at the bottom of
Did
the
I
river.
say sediment?
No, I did. I'm like, sediment or sentiment? Sentiment is the correct one, which you said, Adam, and I did not. This is not a geological conversation. But the sentiment of the worst that people feel economically, I just wonder if they're more likely to leave those highly volatile areas such as California, which seems to just be continuing to get more challenged. We've had a lot of folks move from Oregon and Washington where a lot of the political decisions have worsened from the perspective of people moving here, have worsened their quality of life. And so Wyoming, because we're pretty quiet, we live under the radar. Yeah, everybody wants their guns and their freedom. Like that's the battle cry of people that live in this area. So when the economic outlook is worse, then they move here because there isn't that much of daily impact that a lot of the other parts of the country are experiencing. I just wonder if that's part of what's at play with why a state like Florida that still gets a lot of attention is challenged while Wyoming isn't as much.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is kind of new to Florida, but you brought up California. I think if you look at the coast, when I think about a constrained economic environment, like the people who feel it the least are typically the Midwest.
Yeah.
But you go to California, and New York have produced some of the most extravagant wealth in the world through their real estate. And that's because it booms and busts. Like when things get bad, people migrate into middle America. And during COVID, it was down to Florida because they got the weather and they got the freedom at that time. Then they realized they didn't want to be hot, so they moved back out of here. But it's like, this is like very common. It like contrasts and goes back out. Like people leave California, they go to Nevada, they go to Wyoming, places that have better states' rights, more protective of your personal kind of rights and the gun laws. And it's just a complete contrast. So people go, it got expensive here. The state's going crazy. We move. And then what happens when the economy gets good is they go back.
Yeah.
Right. Because the thing about, if you think about California, which I spent 10 years, I lived in California, Southern California, it's the most beautiful place in the United States. Like you don't get, like you can't change the landscape, the infrastructure. Like you can be in San Diego,
up through those beach cities like Carlsbad and Encinitas and all those places. And there's nothing like that in the United States. Huntington Beach, if you go a little further north.
Yeah.
So people move away from that and they go, oh, I really like that. The economy is better. I go back. And then there's a similar but different vibe up in New York. Like New York is a world linchpin. You know, the stock exchange, it's just like a attraction. Like you go around the world and they're like, I want to go to New York and see the Statue of Liberty, or it's like going to see the Eiffel Tower or something. You know, it's like a big deal. So people always end up going back to it. So it booms and then it busts, and they suck into you guys in the middle of the US. And then when the economy's growing, they go back.
Mm-hmm. So definitely understanding or paying attention to what's happening, how the different states and the economy impacts the different states, I think is helpful, especially as investors, because it can inform us if we look ahead at what might we be predicting and where might be the best place to invest. Like so for example, if somebody's investing in California and let's say Nebraska, I don't know why Nebraska. So maybe doubling down on California during certain periods of time and then doubling down on Nebraska, but being able to have both approaches helps keep a well-balanced portfolio and, you know, kind of being able to ride both waves.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you. And, you know, the objection we get with that, Sheri, is that, well, I don't live, how could I invest somewhere if I'm not there? Which, you know, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around that people don't do that, because I own properties in Milwaukee. I've never been there. I own properties in Alabama. I don't go there. I own properties in Tennessee, in Georgia, and I live in Florida. I don't hold anything here. I only flip or wholesale here in Florida, because I don't like the economics here. So I hold in other states, but I've built my entire business systems and processes around basically being virtual, like doing it from a distance.
And part of what I love about being part of Seven Figure Flipping is because we get exposure to people like you, Adam, that are doing the virtual investing and that are successful in it. So that when I think for the first time, you know, when I did think for the first time a few years ago, oh my gosh, because all of my husband and my investing over the past 15 plus years was just in our backyard. And as I said, if you were listening to the beginning, we're like 65,000 people. There's not a lot of opportunities. I mean, we created opportunities, but if we really want to scale, there is a ceiling that we hit. And so what are our options? We could move move to an area in order to then cultivate more. But that's a pretty big, significant commitment. And then we're still stuck with wherever we move to, the pros and cons. And so being part of a community or being around people that have cracked that nut, that are being successful, and that you can be inspired by, or that I can be inspired by, I think is so incredibly important.
Yeah, it's like it's just like a mindset of belief. It's like, how could you ever do that? It's like, I don't know how I could not do it. It's all I know.
Yeah.
And of course, in today's day and age, there's so much, we're so tech enabled. We have so much access to information. It helps to mitigate risk, and we can zap pictures and videos that, you know, like are almost as good as being in person. And there's companies out there, like we use Investor Boots to go take photos, to go do inspections, to go sign documents, to like literally there's companies that do this nationwide that we just leverage their skill sets and assets to buy down our risk. I think that's the other thing, is that if I were to just kind of pull out a little bit and not just think as a real estate guy and think about an investor, like whether it's in the stock market or anything, fundamentally diversity is good. And diversity in real estate specifically, you can diversify by asset class. I can put some money in commercial offices or commercial apartments. I can put money in single family. I can put money in short-term rentals and mid-term rentals and long-term rentals
and that creates diversity in my portfolio. But I can also diversify by location, right? So if you think about where we can be vulnerable from an economy perspective, well, if I'm in Michigan in 2008, I got my lunch eaten because that market crumbled with the auto industry. But if I'm in Michigan, Indiana, Wyoming, and I've got my hooks into 3 markets and they're running efficiently, one market goes down, I'm not underwater. So there's something to be said about having diversity. Of course, the risk there is distraction.
Yeah.
And, like letting your operation kind of get out of hand and be too fractured, which is why you have to do it smartly, of course. Like I'm a big proponent, like you master one thing and then you gently add the next thing until you master the next thing, and then you can scale it. But I think we, ambitious entrepreneurs, we're like, to the moon.
No, we never do that. Never. But Adam, I actually love that you brought up the perspective of the diversity, because I do think that it's beat into us that diversity is decreases risk. One of the things, though, that I've learned as I've been an entrepreneur and worked on the quote unquote diversifying, is that there are different types of diversification. And I would argue you talked about 2. There is increasing the verticals or increasing the different types of asset classes. That's a type of diversity. Or there's sticking with what you know and you've had success, but then just moving it to an additional location. And I would argue in most situations that taking what you've already done successfully and then just adding another location is a far better way of diversifying than having to go through from ground zero, learning a whole nother asset class and a whole nother strategy. That it's more efficient to take your zone of genius and just add another location. So I love that you differentiated those 2 kinds of diversification.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I actually had somebody ask me this question, and I feel like if you were like new into real estate, you're like listening to this podcast, you're listening to Bigger Pockets, you're like, oh my gosh, real estate, commercial, residential, what do I do? Long-term, short-term rental. And I had somebody ask me this question, and the way it's framed is how people think about it, in my opinion, of like, oh, I'm going to wholesale, then I'm going to flip, then I'm going to buy apartments. Like they see these as stepping stones. And I don't see it that way. I feel like if your passion is apartments and that's where you want to be, you go all in on that and you work until you're successful in that. And even as a residential guy who's, flipping and wholesaling and buying rentals, like if I'm going to go into apartments, it's going to be passively. I'm not going to go be the guy in apartments, learn how to underwrite, learn how to asset manage, I'll learn that over time. But if I wanted to diversify and I had a successful flipping company today, and I was like, I want to get some of my money out of this and into that being commercial, I would invest over there passively with somebody who's good actively, who's built that skill set. Like you said, they know what they're doing. I don't have to go learn it all. I just need to know enough to vet the investment and put some money over into that part of the space. Because you're right. Like if you're a flipper and you're like, I'm going to add being a commercial guy to my repertoire. It's like, okay, but that's like, it took you 10 years to become this amazing flipping company. Mm-hmm. It's probably going to take you some years to become a good commercial real estate investor as well, even with your foundational skill set. So I totally agree with you. Like your zone of genius, can I replicate it and diversify location? If I just want to get my money spread out over asset classes, I'm likely not going to do it actively. I'm going to invest in somebody's syndication. I'm going to invest in a different kind of way where it doesn't take my focus off of my main thing that generates money that I'm already built my skill set in, that I'm already good at.
Yeah, I love that. Adam, so as we are considering state of market and recognizing that every state in the state of market is different, every zip code might be a little bit different, What would you say to the investor that's listening to this? What would you say to them about how to approach their current market, the kind of research they need to do, and then how to respond to that in a way that increases their I guess chance of profitability?
That's a great question. If I was new and I'm just picking a market, I go, the world is my oyster. I'm just picking a market. The first and most important, in my opinion, macroeconomic thing I'm going to look at is the population growth. If I'm going to start as an investor, I want to be investing in a place that people are going to, because ultimately people create the demand, and business is all about supply and demand. So the very first thing I look at is that place growing or staying even or declining? If it's declining, I don't want to be there. The second thing I look at is I'm going to look from the perspective of what my goal is. If I'm going to go and become a wholesaler primarily, I want to find where there's a lot of cash transactions happening. So I'm going to do research on cash transactions. If I go into, North Carolina, and North Carolina's it's booming with flippers, and I'm going to be a wholesaler, that means my demand is going to be high. I can go into that market and sell those deals easily. And then if I'm flipping houses, I'm looking at population growth, and then I'm looking at supply, days, months of supply, like you said. Like if it's 3 months or less, there's ideally a seller's market. That's what I'll be. Once I flip the house, I'll be a seller. I'll sell those assets faster and for more money. And then I'm not just going to look at the here and now. I'm going to look at the trends as well. Like what's happened over the last year, the last 5 years, the last 10 years in this market, and try to understand why those changes have happened. And I think for me, like at a broad level, that's how I'm looking at choosing a market.
And what would you say to the real estate investor who has already chosen or feels like they have to invest in their backyard? And so they've already made that decision that, hey, I'm going to invest in the town I live in or somewhere, super close. How they can pivot or adjust what they're doing based on the current economy in that area?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things here. If the difference between you taking action and not taking action is the fact that you feel more comfortable investing in your backyard, even though they're not the most optimized economic conditions, I would say invest in your backyard. Because even in Florida right now, which if you look at the data across states is the worst real estate market, we are making money. Plenty of people are making money. And Bill always says this, and I think it's so great, which is all you have to do is find the inefficiency in the marketplace. And like what I said in the beginning was, hey, lower price point, mobile homes, great thing to flip here in Florida, or higher luxury flips go really well. So if I need to feel that comfort and I'm like, I just can't imagine being virtual, then sure, I'll do it in my backyard, but I'll dig really deep into what's moving and where I want to focus my effort, get very niche down on that. Now, if you're kind of open-minded and you're like, you know what, maybe I could do the virtual thing, I would go all in on studying how to put that infrastructure in place. And then you have the advantage of picking the literal best market based on the data. And I would just do the research and go, where do I want to be? Where are people moving? Where are houses selling for the most? Where are they selling the fastest? I'd get into that market. I would become an expert in there. I'd get with local agents. I would talk to property management companies. I would start building my contractor team. And I might even go to that market to check it out, get a good feel for it. And then I'm just all in on that market.
Yeah, those are really good recommendations, because that's really what everybody needs, is to have some clear understanding of what the next step is. No matter where we are in a real estate journey, what is that next step? And then we ask ourselves, and what is getting in the way of taking that next step? Sometimes it's information, but I would say more often than not, we have sufficient information to take action. We're just letting fear control. We're letting the emotions make the decision. Like Adam talked about earlier, we're letting the emotions make the decision, and then we're trying to justify our inactions by logic. So get around more people that are doing, that are acting, that are doing the thing, because that will help you recognize that, oh, my inaction really is about me, and it's not about logic. It's not about what actually could happen, because people are doing it and people are making it work.
That's right. Yeah, and we know we in our world, we know all the investors kind of across the country, and they're all making it work where they're at. They're all making it work. So I think that's really, really powerful. Well, Dr. Sheri Fluellen, this has been such a good time. I know that this will help somebody take the next step. Thanks for hosting another amazing podcast with me. If you're listening to this podcast, the way that we can impact more people and more lives is just a little bit of help from you. And that's get on and leave us a review. Ideally, it's 5 stars. I like 5 stars because that's the most you can get. And I feel like I'm winning, but it also helps other people see the podcast. It takes like 30 seconds. If you're listening to this, you thought this was a good episode, jump in, leave us a quick 5-star review. Thanks for listening to this one, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.